What you're about to hear cost one woman everything: her home, her safety, her last $20. And it started with a knock on a door that nobody answered. It was 11 o'clock at night. A woman stood on a porch in the rain, holding a 3-year-old boy wrapped in a shower curtain because she didn't own a raincoat. 7 doors behind her, 7 no's, 7 locks clicking shut before she could finish her sentence. But when she knocked on the 8th door, the one at the end of Chestnut Lane, the one with the broken porch light and the garden nobody tended, the person who opened it didn't say no. That person said 4 words that split the night wide open. How long do you need? Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York, London, maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Now let me tell you about a night.
Not a special night by the calendar, not a holiday, not a birthday, not an anniversary of anything worth marking. A Tuesday, late October. The kind of night where the rain doesn't fall straight down, but comes at you sideways, pushed by a wind that keeps changing its mind about which direction to blow. The sky was black. Not dark blue, not gray, black. The streetlights on Chestnut Lane were spaced too far apart, so the light fell in pools with long stretches of nothing between them, and a person walking between those pools would appear and disappear and appear again, like a ghost flickering through a world that didn't want to see her. The woman walking through those pools of light was named Yemisi Adebayo. She was 29 years old. She was barefoot. Her shoes, a pair of canvas sneakers she had owned for 2 years, were back at the apartment she had left 40 minutes ago, sitting by the front door where she always put them, lined up neatly because Yemisi was the kind of person who kept things neat even when everything else was falling apart. She didn't take her shoes because she didn't have time. When you leave a place in a hurry, you don't think about shoes. You think about the child. The child was pressed against her chest. His name was Tobias. Toby, she called him. He was 3 years old, small for his age, with round cheeks that still had baby fat in them and eyelashes so long they left tiny shadows on his skin when the light hit him right. He was wrapped in a blue shower curtain, not a blanket, because the blankets were back at the apartment too, and the shower curtain was the first thing Yemisi grabbed from the bathroom on her way out. It crinkled when Toby moved. He was not crying. That's the part that hurt the most.
He was not crying because he had learned at 3 years old that crying made things louder, and louder meant worse. Yemisi's lip was split, the bottom one on the left side. A thin line of blood that the rain kept washing away and her body kept replacing. Her left eye was swelling, not fully closed yet, but puffing up at the outer corner, turning a color that would be purple by morning. She had a bruise on her forearm in the shape of 4 fingers, and she held Toby with her right arm because the left one hurt too much to lift above her waist. She was walking barefoot in the rain with a split lip and a swollen eye and a child wrapped in a shower curtain because the man in the apartment behind her, the man she had lived with for 4 years, the man who was Toby's father, had come home drunk for the 3rd time that week, and this time he didn't just yell. This time he threw a plate, and when the plate missed, he didn't stop. His name was Derek. I will not spend much time on Derek.
Not because he doesn't matter to the story, he does, but because this story is not about the man who broke things. It is about the woman who walked through the rain and kept knocking. But what happened next changed everything. Yemisi had lived in this city for 6 years. She came from Lagos, Nigeria, with a student visa and a spot in a nursing program at the community college. She was smart, the kind of smart that doesn't announce itself, the kind that sits quietly in the back of the classroom and gets the highest score and doesn't raise a hand when the professor asks who did well on the exam. She finished the program in 2 years. She passed her boards on the first try. She got a job at a clinic on the east side, not a hospital, a clinic, the kind of place with plastic chairs in the waiting room and a receptionist who also answered the phones and also filed the insurance claims and also watered the plant by the door that was dying no matter how much water it got.
Yemisi worked at that clinic for 3 years. She was good. She was gentle with the patients, especially the elderly ones and the children. And she had a way of explaining medical things in plain words that didn't make people feel stupid. She took blood pressure with warm hands. She remembered names. She remembered allergies. She remembered that Mrs. Gutierrez was afraid of needles, and that Mr. Otieno needed his instructions written down because his English was better on paper than in his ears. Then she met Derek. Derek was a construction worker, tall and charming in the way that certain men are charming, like a fire that looks beautiful from a distance and burns you when you get close. He said the right things. He opened doors. He brought her flowers, yellow ones, because she told him once that yellow was her favorite color, and he remembered. That remembering felt like love. For a while it was. Toby was born a year later. Yamisi reduced her hours at the clinic to care for him.
Then she stopped working entirely because Derek said he made enough and she should stay home with the baby. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. Believing him was easier than admitting that the door-opening man was slowly becoming the door-closing man. The man who checked her phone, who asked where she had been, who said, "You don't need to work," in a voice that meant, "I don't want you to leave this apartment." The first time he hit her was when Toby was 14 months old. A slap, hard enough to leave a handprint. He apologized immediately. He cried. He brought yellow flowers. Yemisi looked at those flowers and felt something inside her fold in half. Not break, not yet, but fold, the way paper folds before you crease it. It happened again, and again. The intervals shrank. The apologies thinned. The flowers stopped. By the time Toby was 3, Yemisi had a map of bruises on her body that she covered with long sleeves and careful smiles. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't have anyone to tell. Her family was in Lagos. She had no close friends. Derek had made sure of that slowly, the way water erodes stone, so gradually that you don't notice the shape changing until the stone is gone. But tonight, Tuesday night, late October, something cracked. Not folded, cracked. Derek threw the plate and it shattered against the wall behind her head. A piece of ceramic caught her lip. She tasted blood. Toby was in the next room. She heard him go quiet. The dangerous quiet. The quiet of a child pressing himself flat against the wall. And something inside Yemisi ignited. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something maternal and ancient and completely done. She walked to the bathroom. She grabbed the shower curtain off the rod. She walked to Toby's room. She picked him up. She whispered, "We're going, mon bébé." She walked to the front door. Derek was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, looking at the broken plate on the floor like he couldn't understand how it got there. She opened the door. She walked out. She didn't close it behind her. And that was only the beginning. The first door she knocked on was apartment 4C, her neighbor. A woman named Rachel who had a small dog and a wreath on her door that said, "Bless this home." Yemisi knocked. The dog barked. Rachel opened the door on the chain. She saw Yemisi's face, the lip, the eye, the barefoot woman in the rain. Rachel's own face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, sympathy, and then something else. Calculation. She said, "I can't. My boyfriend is here. I can't. I'm sorry." The door closed. The lock clicked. The second door was 4A. An older man who opened the door in a bathrobe and squinted at her and said, "It's almost midnight." Yemisi said, "Please, I just need. Can I use your phone?" He looked at the shower curtain. He looked at the blood. He said, "There's a gas station 2 blocks down. They have a payphone." The door closed. The third door was across the hall. Nobody answered. She could hear a television inside. She left the building. She walked into the rain. Toby was awake but silent, his face pressed into her neck, his small fingers gripping the collar of her shirt. She walked 2 blocks to a house with a light on. She knocked. A woman opened the door. Yemisi started to explain. "I'm sorry, my name is Yemisi, I need help, I have a child." The woman said, "I don't know you," and closed the door. The 5th door was a house with a pickup truck in the driveway. A man opened it. He looked at her. He looked at Toby. He said, "Lady, it's the middle of the night. Call 911. He closed the door. The 6th door.
A house with a porch swing. An older woman opened it. She looked kind. She had white hair and a bathrobe with roses on it. She said, "Oh, honey." She looked behind her, into the house. She whispered, "My husband won't. I can't let strangers in, he'll—" She stopped. Her face crumbled. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She closed the door slowly, like it hurt to do it. The seventh door. A house with a light in the upstairs window. Nobody answered. Yemisi knocked 3 times. The light turned off. 7 doors. 7 no's. 7 locks clicking shut against a woman with a split lip and a child who had learned not to cry. Yemisi stood on the sidewalk. The rain was heavier now. Her feet were numb. Her left arm throbbed. Toby shivered against her chest. She looked down the street. One more house, at the very end of Chestnut Lane. Set back from the road. A small house, smaller than the others, with peeling paint and a porch that sagged on the left side and a garden out front that was more weeds than anything else. The porch light was broken. The house was dark. She almost didn't knock. What was the point? The house was dark. Nobody was awake. Nobody wanted to help. The whole world had closed its doors and turned off its lights, and she was standing in the rain with bleeding feet. She hadn't noticed, but she had stepped on something 2 blocks back, and the bottom of her right foot was cut. And a child who deserved better than a shower curtain and a sidewalk. But she knocked. One more time. Because Toby was shivering. Because there was nowhere else to go. Because stopping meant going back. And going back was not something Yemisi Adebayo was willing to do. Not tonight. Not ever again. She knocked. 3 soft knocks. Now, here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. The door opened. Not on a chain. Not a crack. It opened fully. A woman stood there. She was old. How old, Yemisi couldn't tell in the dark. 60, maybe 70, maybe older. She was short, barely 5 feet, with deep brown skin and white hair she wore in 2 thick braids that hung over her shoulders. She was wearing a faded housecoat, blue with small white flowers, and slippers that looked like they had been resoled more than once. Her face was lined deeply, the kind of lines that come from decades of expressions, from smiling and frowning and squinting into sun and crying in private and laughing in public. Her eyes were dark and sharp and completely awake, as if she had been expecting someone. She looked at Yemisi. She looked at Toby. She looked at the split lip, the swollen eye, the bare feet, the shower curtain, the blood on her right foot. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look behind Yemisi to see if anyone was following. She said, "How long do you need?" Yemisi opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The question was so unexpected, not "Who are you?" or "What happened?" or "Why are you here?" but "How long do you need?" that it short-circuited every response Yemisi had prepared. She had been ready for no. She had been ready for the door to close. She had not been ready for a question that assumed the answer was yes. She said, "I don't. Just tonight, just somewhere to—" The woman stepped aside. She said, "Come in. Watch the second step, it creaks." Yemisi walked into the house. The second step creaked. The hallway was narrow and warm and smelled like cinnamon and something herbal. Dried lavender maybe, or rosemary, or something Yemisi's own grandmother used to hang in bundles from the kitchen ceiling in Lagos. The walls had photographs, dozens of them. Black and white, color, faded, sharp. Faces Yemisi didn't know. A life she couldn't read. The woman led her to a small living room. There was a couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the back, green and yellow and white, the colors of something warm. A lamp with a low light. A bookshelf that covered one entire wall, stuffed so full that some books were horizontal on top of the vertical ones. An armchair with a reading pillow. A rug that was worn thin in the path between the couch and the kitchen, like a river of footsteps had carved a groove in the fibers. The woman said, "Sit down, I'll get towels." Yemisi sat. She held Toby. The shower curtain crinkled. She started to shake, Not from the cold, or not only from the cold, from the sudden absence of danger, from the warmth, from the relief of being inside a house where the door had opened and stayed open. The woman came back with 2 towels, thick, faded, soft from years of washing. She handed one to Yemisi and spread the other on the couch cushion. She said, "Wrap the baby first, then yourself." Yemisi unwrapped Toby from the shower curtain. His pajamas were damp. His little body was warm but trembling. She wrapped him in the towel. He looked up at the woman with his enormous eyes and said the first word he had spoken in an hour. He said, "Cold." The woman leaned down. She looked at Toby. She said, "I know, baby. Let's fix that." She disappeared into the kitchen. Yemisi heard the sound of a kettle being filled, a burner clicking on, a cabinet opening. The woman came back 3 minutes later with a cup of warm milk for Toby. Not hot, warm. Tested on her wrist the way grandmothers test things, and a cup of tea for Yemisi. Toby drank the milk with both hands. He drank it like he had never been thirsty before in his life. When he finished, he handed the cup back to the woman and said, "More?" The woman smiled. The lines on her face rearranged themselves into something beautiful. She said, "As much as you want, sweetheart. There's always more." Yemisi's chest cracked open. She cried. Not silently, not the trained quiet of a woman who had learned to swallow her sounds. She cried out loud, with her shoulders shaking and her swollen eye burning and her split lip stinging with salt. She cried because a stranger had given her child warm milk and said, "There's always more." And that sentence was the most generous thing anyone had said to her in 4 years. The woman sat down beside her. She didn't hug her. She didn't touch her. She just sat there, close enough to be felt, far enough to not be a threat, and let Yemisi cry. She waited, patient, still, like a tree that has learned how to be a shelter without moving. When the crying slowed, the woman said, "My name is Alma Prescott. This is my house. You're safe here." Yemisi wiped her face with the towel. She said, "My name is Yemisi. This is Toby. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Alma held up her hand. She said, "Don't apologize. Not to me. Not tonight. Tonight, you rest. We'll talk in the morning." She set up the couch with sheets and a pillow. She brought a small mattress from a back room, a child's mattress, old but clean, and put it on the floor beside the couch for Toby. She brought him a second cup of warm milk and a pair of socks that were too big for him, but warm. Toby put on the socks and looked at his feet and said, "Big feet." Alma laughed and said, "You'll grow into them." Yemisi lay on the couch. Toby was on the mattress beside her, already sinking into sleep, his mouth still wet with milk, the oversized socks bunched at his ankles. She reached down and put her hand on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat. Small, fast, steady, alive. Alma turned off the lamp. She stood in the doorway of the living room, a silhouette against the hall light, and said, "The bathroom is the second door on the left. There's a first aid kit under the sink. Clean your lip and your foot. And Yemisi?" Yemisi said, "Yes?" Alma said, "The door is locked. Both locks. You are safe." She disappeared down the hall. Yemisi heard a bedroom door close softly. She lay in the dark with her hand on her son's chest and the smell of cinnamon around her and the crocheted blanket, green and yellow and white, pulled up to her chin. She was safe. For the first time, and she couldn't count how long, she was safe. But what Yemisi didn't know yet was that Alma Prescott had opened that door for a reason far deeper than kindness. Morning came gray and quiet. Yemisi woke to the sound of something she hadn't heard in years, someone cooking in a kitchen who wasn't afraid. No tense movements, no hurried clanking, just the calm, steady sound of eggs being cracked into a pan and a spatula scraping gently, and the radio playing low. A gospel station, a woman's voice singing about grace. Toby was already awake. He was standing in the kitchen doorway watching Alma. He was holding the oversized socks in one hand. They had fallen off during the night,
and his mouth was open slightly, the way children's mouths open when they are seeing something for the first time that they want to memorize. Alma was at the stove. In the morning light, Yemisi could see her more clearly. She was 73. You could see it in the hands, thin, veined, spotted with age, and in the way she moved, carefully but not slowly, with the economy of a person who had learned that wasted movement was wasted energy. Her braids were tucked into a head wrap now, blue and gold, and she wore an apron over her housecoat that said, "Kitchen closed, cook still here." Her kitchen was small but organized with the precision of a woman who had cooked 10,000 meals in this room and knew where every spoon lived. She was making eggs, toast, and sliced oranges. She had set the kitchen table for three plates, 3 forks, 3 cups. Like she had been expecting them. She looked up and saw Yemisi in the hallway. She said, "Good morning. How's the lip?" Yemisi touched it. It had scabbed over during the night. It hurt, but less. She said, "Better, thank you." Alma pointed at the table with her spatula. "Sit, eat. The boy too." They ate. Toby ate 3 pieces of toast and all of his oranges, and looked at Alma and said, "Do you have more oranges?" Alma reached into a bowl on the counter and handed him another slice and said, "Always." Yemisi watched this exchange and thought about all the mornings in the apartment. The quiet mornings when Derek was sleeping off the night before and she made Toby breakfast with one eye on the bedroom door, measuring her sounds, pouring cereal carefully so the flakes didn't rattle too loud in the bowl. This morning was different. This morning the cereal could rattle, the toast could crunch. Toby could ask for more and the answer was yes. After breakfast, Alma poured more tea and sat across from Yemisi and said, "Now, tell me." Yemisi told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Derek. 4 years. The escalation. The plate. The running. The 7 doors. Alma listened the way the ocean listens to rain, absorbing it all, holding it, giving nothing back that wasn't needed. When Yemisi finished, Alma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How many times did you almost leave before last night?" Yemisi said, "I don't know. 1 dozen, maybe more." Alma said, "And what stopped you?" Yemisi looked at Toby, who was drawing on a napkin with a pen Alma had given him. She said, "I had nowhere to go. No family here, no money of my own. He controls everything, the bank account, the phone, the car. I have nothing." Alma said, "You have your son. You have your nursing license. And you have 2 feet that carried you barefoot through the rain to my door. That is not nothing. That is everything." Yemisi's eyes filled. She said, "Why did you open the door? Nobody else did." Alma set down her tea. She looked at the photographs on the wall, the dozens of faces, the decades of living. She said, "Because 40 years ago, I was you, and just when you thought you knew this woman, you didn't." Alma told her story the way old people tell stories, slowly, with pauses for breath and memory, with details that seemed small but were actually load-bearing walls holding up the entire structure. Alma Prescott was born in a town 200 miles south of here. She married a man named Clarence when she was 22. Clarence was handsome and funny and could fix anything with his hands and broke everything with his temper. The first 3 years were good. The next 12 were not. Alma had 2 children, a son named William and a daughter named Rose. She stayed because of them. She stayed because Clarence apologized every time. She stayed because the church told her to stay. She stayed because leaving with 2 children and no money and no car in a town where everyone knew Clarence and liked Clarence was a math problem that had no solution. Until the night it did. Clarence came home and went after William, not Alma. He had always only hit Alma. But that night, something shifted in his brain, the way a gear slips and suddenly the machine runs wrong, and he raised his hand at 11-year-old William, and Alma stepped between them and caught the blow on her shoulder and felt something break. Not the shoulder, the last thread of whatever had been holding her in that house. She took the children. She walked. She didn't have a car.
She walked 4 miles in the dark to a house she barely knew, a coworker's house, a woman named Geneva, and knocked on the door. Geneva opened it without hesitation. She said, "Come in." 2 words, no questions, no conditions, just, "Come in." Alma and her children stayed with Geneva for 3 weeks. Geneva helped her find a shelter.
The shelter helped her find an apartment. The apartment led to a job. The job led to another job. William grew up. Rose grew up. Alma grew older and stronger and quieter, and she bought this house on Chestnut Lane 26 years ago with money she saved from working as a home health aide for 15 years. She lived alone now. William was in another state, an electrician with his own business. Rose was nearby but busy with her own life. Alma fixed up the house herself mostly. The porch still sagged because she couldn't afford to fix it. The garden went wild because her knees wouldn't let her bend the way they used to. The porch light was broken because she kept forgetting to ask William to come fix it. But she kept the house unlocked at night. Not the front door, that was locked. But the chain was off. The deadbolt was on a single turn. The door could be opened in 3 seconds by someone who needed to open it. And twice before Yemisi, someone had knocked. Now, pay attention to what happens next. The first was a woman named Sandra, 12 years ago. Sandra had 2 black eyes and a toddler and nowhere to go. Alma kept her for a week, helped her find a shelter. Sandra sent a Christmas card every year after that. The cards had photos of her daughter growing up. The last one showed the daughter in a graduation cap. Alma kept every card in a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet. The second was a teenager named Crystal, 7 years ago. 17 years old. Ran away from a foster home where the foster father... Alma didn't finish that sentence. She pressed her lips together and shook her head and said, "Some sentences don't need endings." Crystal stayed for 2 weeks. Alma enrolled her in a program at the community center. Crystal was now 24 and working at a school in another city. She called Alma on Sundays. And now, Yemisi. The 3rd knock. The 8th door. Alma said, "Geneva opened her door for me. I made a promise that night. I promised that as long as I had a door, it would open." Yemisi said, "That was 40 years ago. You've been keeping that promise for 40 years?" Alma said, "A promise is not a thing you keep for a while. It's a thing you keep until you can't. And I can still get up and turn the handle." Yemisi stayed at Alma's house for 3 months. In those 3 months, Alma did what Geneva had done for her. She gave Yemisi the structure to rebuild. Not the answers, the structure. She helped Yemisi apply for a protective order against Derek. She drove her to the courthouse in her old car, a maroon station wagon from 1998 that started on the 3rd try and made a sound like a large animal clearing its throat. She sat in the hallway while Yemisi spoke to a legal aid attorney. She held Toby in her lap and taught him how to play a clapping game while his mother signed documents that would keep Derek legally away. Alma had a friend named Pastor Ruth from the church 2 blocks over. Not a big church, a small one, the kind that met in a converted storefront with folding chairs and a keyboard instead of an organ. Pastor Ruth connected Yemisi with a women's support organization that helped with temporary housing assistance and job placement. The organization's coordinator was a woman named Diane, sharp and fast-talking and efficient in the way that people are efficient when they've seen too much need and not enough resources. Diane helped Yemisi get reinstated at the state nursing board. Her license was current, but her address and phone number needed updating, and Derek's name needed removing from everything. Yemisi got a job. A real job. A nursing position at a hospital. Not a clinic this time, a hospital. The kind with proper equipment and proper pay, and benefits that included health insurance for her and Toby. She started on a Monday. She wore scrubs that were her own, not borrowed. She wore shoes that fit. She took the bus to work at 6 in the morning and came home at 4 in the afternoon and walked through Alma's front door. And there was Toby, sitting at the kitchen table with Alma, eating orange slices and drawing buildings and trucks and suns with smiley faces. Because Alma watched Toby. Every day. Without being asked and without asking for payment. She said, "That boy needs a grandmother, and I have grandmother left to give." But the real shock was still coming.
By the second month, Yemisi had saved enough for a security deposit. She found an apartment, a small one, on the third floor of a building 14 blocks from Alma's house. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window, a lock on the door, 2 locks actually, because Yemisi asked the landlord to install a second one, and he did without charging her because he had a daughter and he understood. Moving day was a Saturday in January. Cold again.
But different cold. The kind of cold that is just cold, not dangerous, not the cold of bare feet on wet pavement. Yemisi packed 3 boxes. She didn't have much. Alma gave her the crocheted blanket, the green and yellow and white one. Yemisi said she couldn't take it. Alma said, "You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference." Pastor Ruth brought a casserole. Diane brought a bag of kitchen supplies, pots, pans, utensils, things people donated to the organization. William, Alma's son, drove up from out of state with a small bookshelf he had built himself and a toolbox so Yemisi could hang shelves and fix things that broke without waiting for someone else to do it. He was a big man, quiet like his mother, with the same sharp eyes. He set up the bookshelf, checked the locks on both doors, tested the smoke alarm, and before he left, he handed Yemisi a business card. He said, "If anything in this apartment breaks, you call me."
Yemisi said, "You live 300 miles away." He said, "I know people closer. Call me and I'll send them." He looked at Toby and said, "You take care of your mama, little man." Toby nodded very seriously and said, "I take care." Yemisi stood in her new apartment that night. Toby was asleep in the smaller bedroom, in a bed Diane had found through a donation. A real bed, a child's bed, with a wooden frame and a mattress that didn't sag. He was sleeping on his back with his arms spread wide, the way children sleep when they feel safe, taking up all the space because nobody had taught them to make themselves small yet. The oversized socks, Alma's socks, were on the nightstand. He kept them. He called them his grandma socks. Yemisi stood in the doorway and watched him breathe and thought about the 8 doors. She thought about Rachel with the chain and the dog and the boyfriend, about the old man in the bathrobe, about the woman who said, "I don't know you," about the man who said, "Call 911," about the woman with the rose bathrobe who whispered, "My husband won't," and whose face crumbled, about the house that turned off its light, and about the 8th door, the sagging porch, the broken light, the white-haired woman in the faded housecoat who didn't ask what happened, who asked, "How long do you need?" She called Alma. It was 9:30 at night. Alma answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring because she said the first ring was for deciding whether to pick up, and she had already decided the answer was always yes. Yemisi said, "I'm in. We're in. Toby's asleep." Alma said, "Good. Is the heater working?" Yemisi said, "Yes." Alma said, "Did you eat?" Yemisi laughed. She said, "Yes, Alma, I ate." Alma said, "Good. Then good night. I'll see you Sunday. I'm making jollof rice." Yemisi said, "You don't know how to make jollof rice." Alma said, "I bought a cookbook. How hard can it be?" Yemisi laughed again. A real laugh. A full laugh. The kind of laugh she thought she had lost somewhere in the 4 years of silence and measured sounds and careful cereal pouring. She said, "It's very hard. I'll come early and teach you." Alma said, "I was hoping you'd say that." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Yemisi said, "Alma?" "Yes?" "Thank you for opening the door." Alma was quiet. Then she said, "Thank Geneva." She opened hers first. "I'm just keeping the chain going." Yemisi hung up. She stood in her apartment. Her apartment. With her name on the lease. With 2 locks. With a bookshelf built by a man she had never met, who drove 300 miles because his mother believed in open doors. With a crocheted blanket on the couch and a child asleep in a real bed and the smell of nothing dangerous in the air. She went to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet. She found a pen and a piece of paper. She wrote something down. She taped it to the inside of the cabinet door, where she would see it every morning when she reached for a cup. It said, "Door 8. 2 words, a reminder, of the night she knocked one more time when every reasonable part of her brain was telling her to stop. of the woman who answered, of the warm milk and the crocheted blanket and the second step that creaked, of the question that changed everything, not who are you, but how long do you need? And just when you thought this story was about survival, it became about something bigger. 2 years passed. Yemisi was 31 now. She had been promoted twice at the hospital. She was a charge nurse on the pediatric floor, the floor with the sick children, the scared parents, the middle-of-the-night emergencies that required a person who could be calm when calmness felt impossible. She was good at it. She was good at it because she understood fear. She understood the particular terror of holding a child and not knowing if the next minute would be safe. She met that terror in parents' eyes every shift, and she held their hands and said, "I'm here. We're going to take care of your child." And they believed her because she meant it. Every single word. Toby was 5. He started kindergarten in September. He went to school with a backpack that had a rocket on it, and a lunchbox that Yemisi packed every morning with a sandwich, an orange, always an orange, and a napkin with a note. The note said things like, "You are brave," and "Mama loves you," and "Always knock one more time." Toby couldn't read all the words yet, but he kept every napkin in a shoebox under his bed. A shoebox. Like Sandra's Christmas cards. Like chains that keep going. He saw Alma every Sunday. Every single Sunday. Yemisi drove the 14 blocks, and Toby ran up the sagging porch steps and knocked on the door. Always 3 knocks, because that's how his mother knocked the night they arrived. And Alma opened it and said, "Well, look who's here. Come in. Watch the second step." They cooked together. Yemisi taught Alma to make jollof rice, the real way, with tomato paste and Scotch bonnet peppers and thyme, and a patience that Alma said tested her Baptist upbringing. Alma taught Yemisi to make biscuits from scratch, the Southern way, with buttermilk and cold butter and hands that moved fast. Toby sat at the kitchen table and drew pictures and ate whatever came out of the oven first and said things like, "Grandma Alma, your biscuits are the same as a cloud." Alma's house changed. Not structurally, the porch still sagged, though William had finally come to fix the porch light. But the house filled up again, with noise, with food, with a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator and a pair of oversized socks sitting on the couch like a small monument. And then Alma got sick. It started with a cough in March, then tiredness in April, then a doctor's visit in May that led to tests in June, that led to a diagnosis in July that Alma delivered to Yemisi in her kitchen, sitting at the same table where they had eaten eggs and toast on that first morning, in the same voice she used for everything, calm, steady, factual. She said, "It's my lungs, baby. The doctor says I've got about a year. Maybe more, maybe less." He wasn't specific and I didn't push. Yemisi set down her tea. She didn't cry. Not yet. She said, "What do you need?" Alma said, "I need you to promise me something." Yemisi said, "Anything." Alma said, "I need you to keep the door open. When I'm gone, someone is going to knock. Maybe not on this door, maybe on yours. Maybe at midnight, maybe in the rain, maybe barefoot. And when they knock, I need you to open it. Not the chain, not the crack, all the way." Yemisi's chin shook. She said, "I promise." Alma said, "Geneva made me promise. I made Sandra promise. Sandra made her daughter promise. That's how it works. The door stays open because the women keep passing the key." Yemisi reached across the table and took Alma's hands. Those thin, veined, spotted hands that had cracked eggs and wrapped towels around a shivering stranger, and held a 3-year-old boy while his mother signed papers in a courthouse hallway. She held them and said, "You will not go through this alone." Alma said, "I know. That's why I opened the door. Not just for you, for me too." The last 8 months were hard and soft at the same time. Hard because Alma got weaker. Soft because the house was full. Yemisi came every day after work. She brought Toby. She brought food. She brought her nursing skills, checking vitals, managing medications, making the bed with hospital corners that Alma said were too tight for a free woman. Pastor Ruth came with prayers and casseroles.
William came every month now, driving 300 miles with tools and worry. Rose, Alma's daughter, came too, a woman in her 40s with her mother's eyes and a guilt about not being closer that she carried like a heavy coat. One evening, near the end, Alma was in her bed. The house was quiet. Toby was asleep on the couch under the crocheted blanket. Yemisi was in the chair beside Alma's bed, reading aloud from a book she had found on Alma's shelf, a novel about a woman who crossed a desert alone and found a garden on the other side. Alma reached over and touched Yemisi's hand. She said, "Can I tell you something?" Yemisi set down the book. Alma said, "The night you knocked on my door, I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to. Because my knees hurt and I was tired and the bed was warm. I was lying there and I heard the knock and I thought, somebody else will help them. And then I heard Geneva's voice in my head, clear as day. She said, 'Get up, Alma. That knock is yours.'" Yemisi held Alma's hand. She whispered, "I'm glad you got up." Alma smiled. The lines rearranged themselves one more time. She said, "Me too, baby. Me too." Alma Prescott died on a Thursday morning in March. Quietly. In her bed. In her house on Chestnut Lane. With Yemisi beside her and the crocheted blanket, which Yemisi had brought back and draped over her, across her lap. The house smelled like cinnamon and lavender and something warm and old and irreplaceable. Toby was at school when it happened. When Yemisi picked him up that afternoon, he looked at her face and knew. He was 5, almost 6, and he knew. He said, "Grandma Alma went to the sky?" Yemisi knelt down in the school parking lot. She put her hands on his shoulders. She said, "Yes, mon bébé. She went to the sky." Toby looked up. He squinted. He said, "I can't see her." Yemisi pulled him close. She pressed her face into his hair and said, "You don't see her with your eyes, Toby. You see her with your heart." The funeral was small. The storefront church with the folding chairs and the keyboard. Pastor Ruth spoke. William stood in the back with his arms crossed and his sharp eyes red. Rose sat in the front row and held a photograph of Alma and Geneva, taken 40 years ago. 2 women standing in a doorway, one opening the door and the other walking through it. Sandra sent flowers, white ones. The card said, "For the woman who opened the door. With love, Sandra and Maya." Maya was Sandra's daughter, the one in the graduation cap. Crystal came in person. 24 years old, tall, steady, wearing a blazer and carrying herself like a woman who had been rebuilt from the ground up. She stood at the front of the church and said, "I was 17. I had nowhere to go. She gave me a bed, a plate of food, and a week of her life. She never asked for anything back. I asked her once why she did it. She said, 'Because somebody did it for me, and the only way to pay that back is to pay it forward.' I've carried those words for 7 years. I will carry them for the rest of my life." Yemisi spoke last. She stood at the front of the storefront church with the folding chairs and the low keyboard and the photograph of 2 women in a doorway, and she said, "I knocked on 8 doors one night. 7 of them closed. The 8th one opened. And the woman behind it didn't ask who I was or what happened or whether I deserved help. She asked, 'How long do you need?' That question saved my life. Not because of the words, because of what was behind them. A belief that a person standing at your door in the rain has already answered the only question that matters, which is, are you worth helping?" Alma believed the answer was always yes. For everyone. No exceptions, no conditions. Just, come in. Watch the second step. She paused. She wiped her eyes. She said, "Alma made me promise to keep the door open. I am keeping that promise. And I am asking everyone in this room to keep it too. Not because it's easy. Because a woman named Geneva did it for Alma, and Alma did it for Sandra, and Alma did it for Crystal, and Alma did it for me. The chain doesn't break if we don't let it. The door stays open if we keep answering the knock." She sat down. Toby was beside her.
He reached over and put his small hand on her knee and said quietly, so only she could hear, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to have a big door." Yemisi held his hand and said, "You already do, mon bébé. You already do." 6 months after the funeral, Yemisi came home from work on a Wednesday night. It was raining. Late October again. She parked on the street and walked toward her building. The lobby door was locked. She had her key ready. And then she heard it. Knocking. Not on her door, on the building's side entrance. A door nobody used, tucked between the garbage bins and the bike rack. Knocking. 3 soft knocks. Yemisi stopped. She walked around the side of the building. A woman was standing there, young, maybe 22, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket, barefoot, lips swollen, eyes red, the rain coming at her sideways. The woman saw Yemisi and flinched. She stepped back. She said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just looking for—" Yemisi set down her bag. She stood in the rain and looked at this woman and this baby and these bare feet and this night that was so much like another night it could have been a mirror. She said 4 words. "How long do you need?" The woman's face broke open, not with tears, with something bigger than tears, with the sudden, overwhelming realization that a door was opening and it was going to stay open. She said, "I don't know." Yemisi said, "That's okay. Come in." She took the woman upstairs. She gave her towels. She warmed milk for the baby. She made tea. She pulled the crocheted blanket, green and yellow and white, the colors of something warm, off the couch and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The woman said, "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Yemisi sat down across from her and said, "Because someone helped me once, and she made me promise." The woman looked at the blanket around her shoulders. She looked at the warm milk in her baby's cup. She looked at the lock on the door, 2 locks, and the apartment that was warm and quiet and safe. She said, "What was her name?" Yemisi said, "Alma." The woman said, "Tell me about her." And Yemisi did. She told her about Chestnut Lane and the broken porch light and the second step that creaked, about the cinnamon and the braids and the housecoat with blue flowers, about warm milk and crocheted blankets, and a question that changed everything. And somewhere above them, past the ceiling and the roof and the rain and the clouds and all the dark sky, somewhere in the place where good women go when their knees can't carry them anymore and their doors finally close for the last time, Alma Prescott sat in a chair very much like her old armchair, and she smiled. The deep smile, the one with all the lines. And she said to Geneva, who was sitting right beside her, "She kept the promise." And Geneva said, "Of course she did. That's what the door is for." Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with a friend. Drop a comment and tell us what part hit you the hardest. We'll see you in the next one.